Welcome to Nkhani Zathu, the pod that tells Indigenous stories every day, the platform that tells you what's good and what's odd for young people and elderly alike in the areas of art, history, and culture preservation. And now your host, Rinah Kasongo.
Hello, and welcome to the Nkhani Zathu podcast, a platform where we invite some of your storytellers to share stories of their stories. Today's episode is made possible many thanks to STR Publishers for constantly powering us with these conversations. Today, I have the privilege of having a conversation with one I would proudly describe as one of the best storytellers we have in Zambia. This man is a 3-time Ngoma award-winning author, and he has written multiple, I wouldn't call them books, stories. He's an all-time storyteller. He has written a number of stories that highlight the Zambian and African experience. I am talking about the one and only Dr. Chishimba Lumbwe. Doc, it is so good. Genuinely, I feel really good to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Rinah.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine at the moment. Thank you, Rinah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
As we get started, I have I wouldn't call it a game, but just something for us to get to know you.
Yeah.
So I want you to share with me 3 things about you. 2 of those things have to be truths, and 1 has to be a lie. And I need to guess the lie.
Right. I was in the army. I am a qualified doctor. And at one time, I played for the Zambia national football team.
That's very easy. You didn't play for the national team. Of course, you did. You were in the army, and you're also a doctor.
Yes.
So you definitely didn't play in the Zambia army. I mean, football. So yeah, that was easy. All right. Yeah. I will give you the opportunity to just really briefly share with our audience who you are, what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. As I said, I'm a retired Major General in the Army. I was qualified as a doctor several years back, about 1980. And I was in government in the Army for a long time. And I retired some 15 years back. And after that, I've been in private practice. I still maintain my practicing license. I'm a specialist in sugar disease, diabetes, and hormone diseases, like the thyroid gland. So I'm now in private practice at a place called Muti Medical Center. That's where I do my practice.
Yep. You've forgotten one thing you're very proud of. Grandpa.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. By the way, yes, very proudly. Father of 3 children and 3 grandchildren. Yes, I am very proud.
Awesome.
Yes.
Take us back to the time you were growing up. What is that memory you're able to recall has played a significant role towards your life to date?
Yeah, I think my father, Mr. Emmanuel Lumbwe, late now, he was a Bemba teacher. And he wrote Bemba books for the primary schools. For those who are learning Bemba in the 60s and 70s, they were actually using his books. One of them is called Mutali Nakalaba. That was the book which was used for the primary school from grade 1 to grade 3. So as I was growing up, I used to use my father's book to learn Bemba in school. And I would see him writing those books at home. Okay, he would be writing them at home, and then I would go to school and I would be using the books which were written by my father. So that influenced me a bit because I saw that my father was a writer and he was a Bemba writer. So that also made me love the Bemba language because I learned, most of my primary school was in Bemba. And then my secondary school, those days I went to Munali Secondary School. So I was learning in English. But because of my father's influence on Bemba, I always maintained a love of my mother tongue.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was even getting to that. So what really has influenced this passion for storytelling? You may just help us understand that.
Yeah, partly, as I said, it's from my father. And partly it's from my mother. Because my father is from Mprokoso in Northern Province. My mother is from Luapula, Musonda Falls. So each time I would go to the village, especially in Luapula, there would always be stories. My grandmother, my mother, my sisters, in the evenings, there always be storytelling, always. Utushimi with song, Utushimi without song. And as I was growing up and I started working, I actually used to go with a tape recorder. And I actually record those stories. And I've got literally hundreds of those stories over the years which I recorded. So because of that, I started having a passion because I could tell that there were so many stories being told, especially in the villages, and most of those stories were really very good. And so that also sort of developed my passion that, okay, fine, then maybe I can put something in writing as well. So that was one of the prompters to me writing, but there were other prompters which I'll tell you about.
Okay. I'm just also getting back to when I was growing up. My grandma would sit us down, especially in the night when there's no power in Zambia. And she would share with us stories of the elephant, the lion turning into a person in the evening.
Chisanguka, in Bemba, yes.
Yes, and then Uruchelo, it goes back to a lion.
That's right, a very famous story that.
Yes.
But
so
there are hundreds.
I can relate to just sitting and then and whatnot.
Yep.
It's so amazing that has really influenced your passion for storytelling.
Yes, that did, yes. It's called Orecha. And part of the reason you may know, Rinah, is that we didn't have written language in most of the Bantu didn't have any written language. So a lot of the history, a lot of the storytelling is oral, not written. So people had capacity for literally hundreds, if not thousands, of stories. But apart from stories, you probably know, since you mentioned in Zambia, there are Ificholeko, there would be riddles. So most of our language is Orecha-based, oral, not written. So people had the capacity to memorize a lot of the oral history and the stories just by memorizing. And then they would just tell them out. If you have been to the village, a 10-year-old can tell you stories, 20, 30, 40 stories by the time they're 10 years old.
Yeah.
So my growing up in town and going to the village regularly sort of brought that home to me quite closely and influenced me in making me a writer much later on.
Yeah, and I think it's also very important for education when you're doing it in form of stories. Mm-hmm. Because then you want to, first of all, be able to memorize. And second, you understand the reason behind something. So, okay, so I shouldn't do this. I think stories are also used as a way of telling children, especially, say, don't do that because these are the consequences.
Absolutely. There's a term for that, Rinah. It's called Cautionary Tales. A lot of the stories are for amusement. A lot of them they're what are called cautionary tales. There is a lesson at the end of the story. And, that is very, very common with what you've mentioned. It's called a cautionary tale.
Cautionary tale.
Yes.
Very interesting. And now you are, I believe, I would confidently say you are one of Zambia's celebrated authors of our time, 3-time Ngoma award-winning author. That is no joke. What has the journey been like? How did it get to you being awarded for this, being recognized for some of these awards and whatnot?
Well, as I said, as I was growing up, I had this interaction with my mother's village life, and my father in town was writing Bemba books, as well as writing Bemba books for the education. And then later on, what happened was I had all these things in me, but in the 80s, that's the time of the epidemic, the HIV/AIDS epidemic. I was a newly qualified doctor then. And that time was terrible, Rinah. At the time of HIV in Zambia, it was a traumatic time for most of us as young doctors. You go to the ward, in the morning and you have maybe 20 patients, young, maybe people your age. You go the following morning and then half of them are dead. Wow. So I was personally quite traumatized because I was losing my friends, losing my relatives, and every single week or so, somebody I knew or one of my patients would die. So I was very badly affected with that. So what happened is I thought, is there something I can put in writing to sort of teach the young people how to prevent HIV/AIDS and how to not get sick. So that led to my first book. Sorry, if I can just reach out for this. This was called Too Young to Die. This was produced way back in 1992, 93. It was called Too Young to Die. So I spent a year, around 91, writing it out, putting my story of my interaction with HIV/AIDS as a doctor and the patient, and writing. It was meant for the young people on what HIV was and how to prevent HIV/AIDS. Now, this book was very popular then. It was used in what was called the Kalulu clubs. The Kalulu clubs those days in the 1990s were the clubs which were teaching young people about prevention of HIV/AIDS using condoms, not sleeping around, and so forth, about blood transfusion and so forth. So those Kalulu clubs, this was the primary book, which was being used for teaching people about HIV/AIDS. And I was fortunate then because the book was taken up by the Norwegian aid, NORAD. It was called NORAD then. And they produced, I believe it was 10,000 copies and distributed all over Zambia. That's when I discovered that I could put something down. And that was my first book. And this came out of my very traumatic experience of looking after HIV/AIDS patients. And that's how come I wrote the first book. Then after that, I realized, it seems I can write. Not just my father can write, but I could also write. Yeah. So after that, I went on to write a big Bemba book, because I thought, this is English. What about vernacular? Since I loved my mother tongue, I gravitated now towards writing in Bemba. And I wrote quite a well-received book by then. Maybe I can just reach out for it.
Sure.
It's this book. It's called Ukulinsoketa Kufa Muntu. I was a doctor. I was by then a specialist in, as I said, diabetes and hormone diseases. And then my patients, what I found out, my patients, they were vernacular patients. They didn't have access to teaching aids about blood pressure, about diabetes, about all sorts of diseases. If you're in town, you could go to the internet. Then by the internet was coming common. You could go to a newspaper, learn about diabetes in English. You go to the internet to learn about hypertension in English. But I realized there was nothing in vernacular. So what I did is I wrote this book, Kulinsoketa Kufa Muntu, meaning forewarned. Insoke is somebody who warns you. Forewarned is forearmed. And what I did is I wrote on 63 diseases, on how those diseases are acquired and how to prevent those diseases, how to treat those diseases with drugs, and also with diet, exercise, and so forth. So this book came out in 2011. Okay, and this book was quite widely distributed. It's also it's supposed to be used in schools. It hasn't been very widely used, but it is approved for use in schools. So it teaches about 63 diseases. And the way I did this, again, I went back to storytelling, where each chapter would start with a story of how a particular disease is sort of acquired, how you would get diabetes or how you recognize that this is diabetes. Then after the story, excuse me, then would come part 2, where I now teach about the disease. What are the symptoms? For example, in Bemba, it would be Sambirire and Pabulwele. Ifilenga, what are the causes? And then kuichingirira prevention. Then ifishibilo symptoms. And then I'll teach about ukundapa, how to treat it. So the first part will be a story. Maybe you can allow me to just briefly read out. Like
Please,
on sugar.
Yeah.
For example, ubulwele wa sugar, diabetes. It would be a story, you see, to start something like this. Chali pachiwelu shimumwe shwa shinde. That's, do you know shinde, the month?
No.
Mumainsa alintushimwa ansaka polio abu kile uluchelo nokusanga kutila tale mfa bwino nakalya. Ale mfo kuna kasana elio nokumona tale muna bwino. So it would talk about some of the symptoms of diabetes in a storyline. And then this person finally realizes, no, why am I having these symptoms? Maybe it's diabetes. Then he goes to the hospital. Then they find it's diabetes. Then I start teaching about diabetes. So it's first of all preceded by a story and then about diabetes with teaching. So that's how I said, okay, let me put something out there for the vernacular people. So this book is very widely used in Luapula, Northern and Muchinga. What they do is like on a Sunday, though in some of the schools it's there, the ladies would pick up one chapter, say on pneumonia, and they would read on that and then learn on that for that week. Then the next week they'll pick up something like on dysentery. So it is still being used in the rural areas.
Very creative, I must say, how you would put it into a story and whatnot.
Yes.
Very, very encouraging. Okay. Talking of stories,
Yes.
I just thought I should mention, if you are a storyteller and you do not know how to package your books into a book, STR Publishers is able to do that. What they offer are editorial works. They go through your manuscript. Basically, if you even just have a story idea but you don't know how to put it into a book, STR Publishers they've assisted a lot of authors, over 100 plus authors, storytellers have been able to turn their stories into an actual book. So you could be one of the people that STR could publish. All you have to do is reach out to them on 0763 465255 or simply send them an email. How do I get published by you? That is through STRpublishers@gmail.com. Your story is right on its way. All right, yeah. Doc, as an accomplished author, what insights can you share regarding good or great writing?
Well, I keep telling people, after these books, I wrote several books. In fact, the ones which got me the Ngoma Awards came later. 2019, there is Sundu.
Yes.
Where's Sundu? Yes. This was the 2019 Ngoma Award. Then after that came another book on slavery. Okay, it's called Not My Brother's Keeper. Can I show that?
Sure.
This one, Not My Brother's Keeper. This was Ngoma Award winner for creative writing in 2019. This was in 2022. It's about slavery. Okay. Then came Ruminations. This one. This is a satire on the politics of Africa. It's a satirical book. This was the Ngoma Award winner for 2023. Okay. So everybody has got a book in them. And people keep asking me, where do you get the time and so forth? I mean, I've got the same 24 hours as you and as Kunda and with our colleagues here. The same 24 hours, okay? But it's discipline. You have to be disciplined, okay? Everybody has a book in them, your life story, your experience in school, you know, your everyday experience. Is just to have that discipline and the will to say, can I put something like this on paper? So you just need to have the discipline, number one. So what I would do is, for example, when I get a bright idea, I would note it down. Because all of us are creative. We're creative. I mean, I'm a scientist by training, okay? But I gravitated towards what you can call the social arts later on. Okay, because everybody's life is sort of different, rather, and everybody has a story in them. Your daily experiences, that's a story. So if you're disciplined, then you can put whatever experiences you have for that day in paper. Okay, so you have to have the discipline. So all I would do is, after I wrote the first initial books, I would sort of, if an idea comes to mind, I would note it down. And those days I would have a small notebook, which I'd put by my bedside, because sometimes the ideas would come at 01. So I'd wake up and write down that idea. And then I had a small recorder, those two small recorders. And if an idea came during the day I was in a car, I would maybe even stop and record what that idea is. And later on, play it around, and then decide, is it something I can move forward with? But now with the smartphones, it's so much easier. I'm with my smartphone every day, and if an idea comes, I will put it down. So after that, it is really discipline. Okay, what do you want to do with your ideas? I'll tell you one of the ideas which I have not yet completed. All I do is, I've been fortunate enough, I do have my own car, but sometimes I get on a minibus, okay, from Charleston to town and back. Just get on a minibus and just listen.
Listening to people?
Listening to people on the minibus. There are stories there.
Okay.
So that's a book which I'm producing. It will be coming later. Maybe I'm letting the cat out of the bag now. But what I mean is we all have these lived experiences where if we are disciplined enough and if we are committed enough, we can turn them into stories. So that is number one. You have to be disciplined. Okay. Then number two, if you so decide that you want to move forward with your story, you have to decide, is it... what type of story? Is it a short story you want to write? Is it a novelette, okay, which is longer than a short story? Or is it in the form of a novel? Is it fiction? Or do you want to add some facts to it? So you decide your story. What is it? Okay? How do you want to tell it? Okay? Then after that, I would normally move and say, okay, fine. If I'm going to move forward with this one, okay, then I would sort of write a draft. Okay? You write sort of a draft. What is it you want? The beginning to be something like this, you note down. The end to be something like this. And sometimes it's better to know the end. Some stories you may not know the end, but some stories you may decide, no, I want it to end like this. So then you have the task of filling in what you feel in between. So you have to have that outline, which gives you a roadmap of what you're going to do with your story. So once you decide on the roadmap of what you're going to do the story, then comes another very, very important part, and that is research. When I was writing the books in Bemba on the stories, I had to go to do the research, went to the National Archives, went to the University Library, went on the internet to see, has anybody else done this work before? Because you can write something which has been done before, and you waste 2 years or 3 years and you find the people, even the publisher, are not interested because that thing has already been covered. So, and then the subject, if you're going to write about whatever subject you choose, these days is so much easier. When I started researching, I would have to go to the internet to get books and so forth. It's so much easier. Even on a smartphone, now you can do your research. You have to research your subject thoroughly. Understand your subject thoroughly. Once you understand your subject, now comes the writing part. And I will, just to shorten the whole thing, once you do the writing and you sort of finish the writing, now comes the most important part, the final part. You may have to rewrite your story even 10 times to perfect it, even 12 times or 13 times. You find that no matter how big the book is, the more you rewrite, you actually improve the content. Okay, so number one is really you have to want to do it, and then you really need the discipline, because we all have got a lot of time. It's 24 hours, a lot of time. I normally would get up, say 4 a.m. up to about 7, do my research and so forth, do a bit of writing, go and work, see my patients, afternoon, play a bit of golf, evening, instead of watching TV, I would go to my office and start writing. So we all have enough time to actually write.
Interesting. We all have enough time to write.
Yes, we do.
And there's a book in each and every person.
Absolutely. Each one has got at least one book, your life history. Each one has got at least one book in them.
Okay.
Yes.
That is very encouraging. Speaking of the Ngoma Awards,
yes,
what is the process like for someone that doesn't know much about it? What is the process involved towards being nominated for this prestigious award?
Well, first of all, you have to get published. Your story has to get published. And your story has to be either in book form or as an ebook, and it has to be on sale. And obviously, the third thing is your work has to be good enough, because you submit. What we do normally is we submit to the Ngoma Awards panels, and then they take your book, and then they go through and then they choose 3 normally for each title. For example, in writing, you have got best male book, male writer, most outstanding male writer, then most outstanding female writer, and then you have got book of the year. Okay, most outstanding book of the year. So there are about 3. So there's the male writer, female writer, prose, then the most outstanding book, which is for both male and female. So they nominate at least 3 works in each of those categories. So your book has to be good enough to be nominated. I've been nominated 5 times. Okay, my work has been nominated 5 times, and my works have won 3 times. So after that, then the Ngoma Awards, I've got a panel which decides. They go through for maybe a period of 2 to 3 months. They go through. I think they've got these various writers and various prominent people in Zambia who go through the books, and then they will decide in the end which are the books which they consider as to be the winner in that category. So you have to be good enough, the work has to be good enough, and then you have to submit, you have to be published, and the work has to be on sale to the public before you can enter the Ngoma Awards.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting and encouraging. Because you have been, of course, an award-winning author, what
Yes.
have these accolades meant to you, and how has it, encouraged you to continue telling stories?
Yeah, well, being a writer in Zambia is a very tough ask, if I may put it that way, in the sense that it's very difficult to make a living out of writing. And part of the reason has been that we have been a little bit poor on the marketing. Us from the old school would always take our books to Bookworld or to what's it called? Brain what?
Which one? Grey Matter?
Grey Matter,
Yes.
and to the other bookshops, Kenneth Kaunda Foundation, and so forth. And what we find that the book sales, if you use that route, the book sales are really not that much. And it's very, very few people who have managed to sell enough to sort of recoup their input, the amount of money they've put in. So with people coming in like Sotren now, I've had quite a lot of good advice that it's not only the bookshops where you can buy books, but books can be sold through the internet, through the social media and so forth. So now we are learning that apart from the standard of putting these in bookshops, which can take you 10 years to sell 1,000 copies, there are other avenues. So now we're having these other outlets of selling books, and we are learning from people like Sotren on how to market ourselves. So now we are marketing ourselves, and perhaps we can sell a little bit more. So previously, it was very difficult to say I'm going to be a full-time writer in Zambia. You absolutely starve if you go that route. But now, hopefully, with the new social media coming on and so forth, we're able to sell a little bit more, and maybe the writing is going to improve. The writing, because there must be a lot of budding writers who want to, put their books on the market in Zambia. Look at the Kenyans, look at the Nigerians, look at the South Africans. Okay, they have got a very big audience in their own countries, which makes them sell a lot of books, and most of them are internationally renowned. I don't believe in Zambia we don't have writers who are as good as the South Africans or the Nigerians or the Kenyans. They must be there. But the way we have been selling our books has been a very low key, and we are not able to get on the world stage. But now with the coming of social media, and I keep mentioning Sotren because I've had interaction with you, and you have opened my eyes in a way of how to move forward with book marketing. With what is coming on board now, we are hoping that Zambia can also be on the market for writing, because I know there are 20 million Zambians. There must be Zambian writers who are as good as the Nigerians or the Kenyans or the South Africans. But we have to know how to put ourselves out there.
Interesting. Yeah. I like that how you've put it, people from the old school are now catching up with what is going on. And just to add on, I would also say that what helps also good books sell is people having a connection with the person that has written.
Yeah.
That is where now I think you've been emphasized towards branding things like that. I think that also helps. And and now moving on to my next question.
Yes, please.
What elements of a story would you say are key towards readers resonating with a story? What are some of the elements that are important towards readers resonating with a story?
I think, first of all, it's relevance to their sort of everyday life. Okay? I'll give a typical example of Sundu, for example. Mm-hmm. Sundu...
Please, before, as you're talking about Sundu, just tell us more about that one.
Sundu.
Yeah, and connecting to what I've just asked you.
Sundu, the relevance, for example, about Sundu is that it talks about colonialism in Sundu, but in a story form, like a Kashimi, not in the form of like a textbook. Okay, it's not like a textbook learning on Saroil or Zelensky, learning on the British coming to Africa and what they did. No, I sort of simplify and make it very relevant to the Zambian scenario, so that when somebody is reading, it's like Kashimi. I tell it like a Kashimi, and even the start, for example, Sundu, if I may be allowed, it actually talks about colonialism. But let me show you the way it starts. Okay, it says chapter 1, in the beginning. Somewhere in Central Africa, near the epicenter of the origin of all humankind, there existed a large, rich, and beautiful country called Sundu. So it's like I'm telling a story, like the way we do it in the villages. So it's like told in the story form, Akashimi, or the other word is, Akashimi, Umulumbe. That's the word I was looking for. Umulumbe, like Akashimi. And then that's the way I tell the story of colonialism. So that any Zambian who's reading this can remember the stories and actually connect, and they're able to read and follow. And the relevance is much more easier for them to identify with the story because it's told in a format which they're familiar with. Okay. Oh. So, it's relevance. Okay. And that is one part of it. But also the other part, when we talk about the other books, the other forms of storyline. I mean, you have got, of course, this about, as I said, about colonialism. But some of them, it's sort of like science fiction. It's purely fiction. And some people like that kind of genre. So it depends on what people like. But I have written all sorts of genres. One of them is, as I said, about colonialism. I've written about slavery. I've written about more or less like science fiction. So there are different parts. And as I said, first of all, people must have some sort of like relevance. What is this about? Does it affect me? Kind of thing.
Yeah, very interesting. Talking of your publications,
yes.
Having this book out, Albert Einstein in the Belgian Congo.
Yes.
What inspired this crazy comic book? I think it's crazy in that what would Albert Einstein be doing in the Belgian Congo? But please share with us.
Well, as I said, I started off as a scientist, okay? And then went into the social sciences, writing books and so forth, in Bemba, in English and so forth. But my training is that of a scientist. And through the years, what I've learned is that the societies, especially our white colleagues, the whites, always want to put the Africans down, that the IQ of Africans is low and the IQ of the whites is higher. But then, I sort of, after all my research, I discovered that, look, we have been what is called Homo sapiens sapiens, okay, or wise man, for the last 200,000 years, okay? All humanity started in Africa. I hope you know that. It's all started in Africa, somewhere Horn of Africa. That's where all the human beings started off. And then some 100,000 years ago, so they crossed over the bridge in somewhere near Egypt there into Europe, then went south into the Australasian Empire, then went to Europe, and then the skin color changes went about because of climate, okay? Because here in Africa, we are black-skinned. Why? Because we have got melanin to protect us against the sun. Because the sun, ultraviolet sun, if you have very light skin, you can get skin cancer. So that's how come we are dark skinned, because a lot of melanin. When people moved more than 70, 80,000 years ago, went to Europe, where there's not enough sun, the skin became lighter because they needed more light to make vitamin D. Because if you have got a dark skin, you are not going to make vitamin D where you don't get so much sunshine in Europe. Okay, so everybody starts off from Africa, from all basically Africans. and then went abroad, and then these other changes are because of environmental pressures. So if the people in Congo rainforest, people in Amazon rainforest, the Inuits in the Arctic, then you've got the Chinese and the Indians, and then you've got the whites in Europe and so forth. Everybody over the last 200,000 years, has been evolving in their own way, and they have mastered the environments, and they have adapted to their environments. So each society has to have enough intelligence to live up to now, to be existing up to now. So as a scientist, I kept finding all these tests, these assertions that no, the whites are the higher IQ than the blacks, and So I came to thinking. I said, okay, fine. If the whites say they've got a higher IQ than the blacks, what would happen if you drop a white man in the Congo rainforest? Would he survive if he's that intelligent? No, he cannot. Okay? Similarly, if you took somebody from the Congo rainforest and put them in Manhattan, would he survive? Probably survive longer than a white man would survive in the Congo rainforest. So each society has moved up to where we are now, and they're intelligent in their own way. So it didn't make sense to me to compare the IQ of one society, that this have got a higher IQ than this one. It doesn't make sense. It's oranges and apples. It doesn't make sense. For what purpose? So that's what got me right into Albert Einstein in the Belgian Congo. So I said to myself, Albert Einstein, one of the most intelligent persons to have lived, if he was captured by the pygmies and he was given a test in the Congo rainforest, would he pass? What do you think?
I don't.
Would Einstein pass a Congo test? He couldn't pass. But yet he's one of the most intelligent people. So to me, it doesn't make sense, this comparison of IQ of this and IQ of that. No. What is important, Rinah, is what we can call happiness. It's difficult to define, okay? But happiness. Are you telling me that the bushman, the bushman works about 20 hours, okay, to get their food in the Kalahari, and then after that, it's all leisure? Are you telling me the bushman, with only working 15 to 20 hours, is less happy than the chap in Manhattan who works 40 hours a week and develops diabetes and has ulcers and can't sleep and has got a mortgage of 2 million and is constantly having blood pressure? Who is happier? So in the end, if the people in that society are happy, that's the most important thing. I don't see why you should compare the happiness of how you can compare the bushman or a pygmy and then somebody in Europe who is having stress paying his mortgage. Who is happier? If the bushman is happy, that's it. So that's what got me to writing that this comparison, one society to another, comparing the IQ is, sorry to use the word, it's nonsensical. And that's why I wrote Albert Einstein in the Belgian Congo. I wanted Einstein to face the pygmies and face their way of life and get tested by their way of life. So a leakage, it doesn't do very well among the pygmies. That's a leakage.
Interesting. What else should readers expect from that book? And
why there are several stories.
Why should people read this upcoming book?
There are several stories. Apart from Einstein, there is another very interesting book about... it's called The Second Coming.
Is that where you write a letter to God?
No, that's the last one. The Second Coming talks about, as a Christian nation, okay, we follow Christ, okay, most Zambians. So when the Christ came, and from all the writings we read, it was a white man, okay, who came as Jesus Christ. So what I postulate is, again, this is just part of my imagination, that if Jesus Christ was to come back a second time, would he come as a white man? So I postulate that if Jesus Christ was to come back, he would come as something else. And that something else is what you have to find out in the second coming.
I've never thought of it. We're always, because I'm a Christian, we're always like, the coming of Jesus and whatnot. But I've never thought, will Jesus come as a black man or as a white man?
So you have to find out. You have to read the book as well.
Yeah, I'll finish it.
Yeah, so there are several stories also. The last one which we're talking about, A Letter to God, that came out of when I was writing this book, if I may be allowed.
Sure.
Not My Brother's Keeper. It's a very detailed book about slavery, what the Africans went through during slavery. And this was the Ngoma Award winner for 2022. So it talks about the details about slavery, but in a story form, very digestible story form. And there were whites to blame, but we also blacks to blame. We used to sell our own people, by the way. But we those who, it was under a lot of pressure. What used to happen, if your tribe does not sell the next tribe, which is weaker, the people with the guns, the Arabs and the whites, would capture you and sell you as a slave. So a lot of the black tribes which sold their own people and became very rich were doing it initially under duress, but after that they started doing it for profit. So after reading thoroughly on the slave trade and what the trauma that people went through, that's when I wrote the last chapter of A Letter to God. All it says is, God, what happened back there?
Did God abandon us? Are those your questions?
You have to read, yes.
All right. Hopefully you won't get that deep of backlash from the Christian community about this man questioning God.
Well, I think that there are answers, obviously. There are answers there. I'm not very well versed in. The preachers and so forth will obviously give me very good answers because God is always there. So I know I'll get an answer. The answers are there. Just that I perhaps with my superficial understanding of Christianity, I cannot give an answer. But I've got questions. Having read thoroughly what happened, I'm a bit sort of in that position of saying, okay, maybe somebody else who understands better can educate me. What happened back there?
Yeah.
Were we abandoned or not abandoned? Yeah.
All right. Interesting. You spoke about STR Publishers and whatnot. I understand they are publishing this book.
Yeah, this book, yes.
How has been your experience with STR Publishers and whatnot?
As I said, initially I've been writing for quite a long time, but I was of the old school and would get all those books and take them to the bookshops and so forth. So my eyes have been opened that, look, this is a new era. The young guys like Kunda and friends and them, they probably won't walk into a bookshop to buy a book. What for? They're always on social media. Even here, the ones recording me, I've been seeing they've been on their phones, talking to their girlfriends and so forth. So the younger people, the audience who want to sell the books to, have got a different sort of outlook in life. The social media is part of their life. So what STR has taught me is that, look, yes, you can take your books to Bookworld and the other bookshops and even Amazon and so forth. But the majority of the very young people, you have to connect with them through social media. And this for me is a new concept which I was not very well versed in. And this is what now I'm doing. Even part of this interview is now following up on what I'm learning from STR on the new way of marketing. So for me, this is very useful and I'm all for it because obviously I don't want my books standing on the shelves for 10 years. I want my books to be sold. Because if they can win 3 Ngoma Awards, then I would assume that they are good enough. So I would want them to go out there to the general public.
Okay, interesting. Speaking of your purpose for your desire to have many people read your books,
yes.
What is your hope towards the people that read your book? What messages are you hoping to deliver through the books?
Yes, all the books, all the different books really, really have a message, all of them. As I told you, this one, Sundu, was talking about colonialism, but in a story like a Akashimi or Mulumbe format. Okay? This one discusses, I said, about this nonsensical idea of comparing one society to the other and deciding that this society is better than this other society. I say again, excuse me for using the word, but that's nonsense. Okay? This other one has got very good message. It actually, you should learn. If we don't want to repeat history, learn from history. I've got one good quotation here on the book. It says, the more you know your history, the more liberated you are. This was by Maya Angelou. A lot of people don't understand, don't understand how slavery occurred. If you do not understand how you got enslaved in the first place, then you who are growing up, you'll be enslaved again because you do not understand. So this book, it explains slavery, how it came about, but in a story form, not in a textbook form, in a story form. How did we get enslaved? Why did we get enslaved? What went wrong back there? How do we prevent being enslaved again? Okay, so all the books, and the other books was Ruminations, for example. This one was the 2023 Ngoma Awards. This talks about, it's a brutally frank satirical look at African society in the 21st century. It's about politics. I've lived through politics. I was old enough to, at independence, I can still remember lowering the flag. I was about 9 years old. And I've lived through all these governments, and I've lived through politics, and I've been fortunate enough to actually work with 3 presidents. I was actually a presidential physician to Dr. Kenneth Kaunda. Then after that, I was presidential physician to Dr. Levi Mwanawasa. Then after that, I was presidential physician to Dr. Rupia Banda for some time, for about 3-4 months. Then somebody else took over. So I've looked after 3 presidents. So I've been very close to politicians, and I've been following over all these years what's been happening in politics. So I'm able to write about politics and write about the good things, write about the bad things. So this book tells you about what some of the things I sort of do not like about the African politics and Zambian politics. So all the different books actually teach you something about Zambian and African life.
Interesting. And what would you like Dr. Chishimba Lumbwe to be remembered for?
Well, as I said, basically I'm a scientist at heart, and I'm very happy that when in my medical life as a doctor, I was I was sort of the lead person in forming what's called the Diabetes Association of Zambia. I was the president of the Diabetes Association, formed it in a long time ago, 1989, and the association is still going strong. And we look after thousands and thousands of diabetic patients. So I'm very happy that I was key in forming the Diabetes Association of Zambia. And over the years, I've looked after thousands and thousands of diabetic patients, patients with hormone problems, and just generally thousands of patients because I've been a doctor for a long, long time. So I've made my contribution in the medical field, looking after promoting the health of Zambians. That's number one, as a scientist. But also, as I said, I sort of put on another hat of the social sciences. And with my books, my writing, first of all, the medical literature in vernacular, in Bemba, I've sort of contributed in people understanding, using their own mother tongue, about some of the diseases, but also about the social life of Zambia. I've written about colonialism, slavery, a bit of politics. So I've also contributed from the social political aspects as well as from the medical aspects. And as I told you, may have mentioned earlier, I was in the army. I was retired as the rank of Major General in the Zambia Army. So, and I was proud that before you guys were born, during the Liberation Wars, I was in the army during the Liberation Wars. So my unit, I was in what is called 64 Armored Unit, where you have these armored cars. My unit used to we were stationed in Sesheke, and there we were facing the South Africans, okay? In the 80s, I'm talking about the 80s. So I actually took part in those liberation wars when I was in the army, and we were protecting Zambians from being attacked by the South Africans, by being attacked by the Sailor Scouts from Rhodesia. So in the army, I also did take part in protecting Zambia those 40 plus years ago. So all those fields, I think I've made a contribution, and I'd like to be remembered for that.
Very interesting. Very, yes. Very, very inspiring. As Zambia is turning... we're celebrating Zambia at 60.
60 years.
Yes. How do you see the role of storytelling towards shaping our nation's narrative and identity?
It's really, really very, very important. As I said earlier, we have sort of maybe not neglected it as such, but we have not exploited it as much as the Zimbabweans, even Zimbabweans, they have exploited it. But the Nigerians, as you know, they tell their stories very well. The South Africans have got a lot of good stories, and and maybe the East Africans, maybe the Kenyans, they tell their stories. It's part of what I can call the social fabric, telling the story, exploring the social, aspects of life. It's not just about getting up every day and living. We have to explore all those societal sort of interactions in a positive manner. I think most of the stories, when they are positive, they tell you about the life. And if people learn about life, if for example, I'll tell you, the famous book by Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart. It tells life, about the Nigerian life. And that kind of life, the Nigerians have been very proud of it, and they sort of try and emulate some of what is there. They learn from it, okay? So we should be able to tell our part, our story as Zambians, and let the young people learn about this culture of storytelling and this culture of the way we live Zambia. Because right now, we have to be careful, with the social media and, with the internet and with this TV, Sky, DSTV and all that. We are learning so much about other cultures. What about our own? And that's why I'm happy with that. We have got Zambezi Magic, which tells some of the stories about Zambia. And one or two of the stories in this book, I hope can be turned, because this book has got stories as well as got 2 plays. There are plays on COVID. There are plays on the Second Coming. I hope they can be turned into some of the stories which tell the Zambian way of life. Because we're in danger of being overswamped by foreign culture. So we need to preserve our culture, and writing and telling our own story, to me, is very, very cardinal.
Yeah. I would relate to you on that one, where you talk about other cultures invading our own.
Yeah.
There are times when I'm watching something and then it's Nigerian and I'm like, oh God, oh my, then you start like talking like a Nigerian,
You
so
see what
yes,
I mean?
and it's very, you find it interesting and whatnot, and you even want to start dressing like a Nigerian for Filanga Murilos and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I see the cultural invasion part that you're talking about.
Yes.
And we really need to ensure that we're telling our stories
Exactly.
so that we stick to our own culture. Yeah.
I mean, the culture is dynamic. We can't force you people, for example, to dress with bell bottoms, something which was 20, 30 years ago. But I mean, we should also encourage our Zambian way of life. Zambian. We can borrow a few things from here and there, absolutely. But the core of being a Zambian must remain as such.
Okay. As we are winding down this conversation, is there anything else that you would like to just say that perhaps I didn't indicate?
Well, it's just, as I said earlier, it's very difficult to be a writer in Zambia. We now have people like the National Arts Council, which promotes the Ngoma Awards, which sort of helps writers to aspire to, if I'm good enough, or no, even if I'm not good enough, can I also be a Ngoma Award winner? So the government needs to come in to encourage. Because, Sotren, for example, you are coming in and helping writers, but also there's a very big role for the government to play in. For example, for printing books, the printing materials, to make it a bit cheaper, reducing the tax on the inputs for printing books and so forth. And there are ways in which the government can encourage. And I'm glad the National Arts Council has actually been sort of talking to the writers' groups in Zambia, as well as the groups which do the screenplays, the televisions and so forth. They are talking to them now to come up with some sort of agreement or formula, a way of encouraging Zambians to bring up this industry of writing and filmmaking. I mean, there's Hollywood. How much does Hollywood, where did it start? 100 years ago only? And they bring in billions. Okay? There's the South African market, film, and they're bringing in millions. Zambia can use also writing and film culture, videography and so forth as an industry to employ the young people. How many young people are unemployed? There are so many. So one way is not just working in the mines or farming, no. Even the culture, the arts can bring in job opportunities, can bring in money. So there's a role for the government to physically and actively proactively, follow up what they have started. I know the National Arts Council has started this, but they need to work very hard and say that if this can be done in Hollywood and Bollywood and in Nollywood, it can also be done in Zollywood.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, so here's a gift for you from STR Publishers.
Okay.
Specifically, Mary Silabwe Mulenga. She wrote Destined.
Destined. Thank you.
Yes, and we thought of gifting you that book.
Thank you very much. I think you have just reminded me of one point. If you are going to be a writer, you have to be a reader. So if you go to my library, I think I literally read hundreds of books every year. So reading culture is very, very, very important. For those who are aspiring as writers, the reading culture, you have to read for you to be able to write properly. So thank you very much. I appreciate this. And I'm going to read it and give you feedback to Silabwe Mulenga.
Yeah.
Thanll you very much for the book.
She'll be very happy to have your feedback.
Thank you.
Doc, I cannot emphasize just how honored it has been for me to have this conversation on this podcast, because you just sharing with our audience about the storytelling process and your passion is what we need more in order to drive our nation and our continent forward in terms of narrative change and whatnot. So I am very, very honored and glad we had this conversation. And I really look forward to more of your stories being out there for people to read and understand. Slavery, colonialism.
Written all that.
Yes. Health matters in villages.
Written all that.
Yes. These are very, very important stories. So I really appreciate Doc. Thank you for coming.
And I also appreciate the opportunity to speak a little bit more about this. And I really thank STR for giving me this opportunity. I do. Thank you very much.
Awesome. We appreciate.
Thank you.
Well, this is what Nkhani Zathu aims to do. We basically have stories, or rather have storytellers share stories of their stories. And we have been listening to Dr. Lumbwe. What I have picked mostly for me is just there's a book in each and every one of us.
Absolutely.
Everyone has a story to share. And the power of a story is that it has the power to influence another person towards thinking differently or just understanding things better. That is the power of storytelling. This podcast could not be possible without STR Publishers. They ensure that we are always powered every single time we have what it takes to just produce these conversations. Also in partnership with Gobshots, they have been behind the scenes doing all these excellent visuals, and it's been an amazing experience. I hope you have enjoyed, but most importantly, please ensure that you follow our social media platforms. And if you want to connect with Dr. Lumbwe, feel free to connect with him on Facebook and LinkedIn. And he also has a website. It's Dr. Chishimba Lumbwe. I look forward to connecting with you again soon by you sticking on this platform, Nkhani Zathu. Goodbye.
Welcome to Nkhani Zathu, the pod that tells Indigenous stories every day, the platform that tells you what's God and what's odd for young people and elderly alike in the areas of art, history, and culture preservation. And now your host, Rinah.